In 2022, the West was looking at ways for punishing Russia for invading Ukraine. They imposed sanctions on Russians. They removed the Russian banks from the SWIFT system, and they also put a cap at the price on which Russian oil can be bought. They were very critical of India buying Russian oil, but it seems to have softened down since then. Is India still villain of the peace in the crude oil war between Russia and the West? In the latest episode of Energonomics, we discuss this and more. In December 2022, the European Union, G7 countries, and Australia introduced a price cap of $60 a barrel on Russian oil. But did this move get the desired result? I spoke to Bob McNally, founder and president of Rabidon Energy Group. McNally was also a former White House advisor on energy, and this is what he said.
The cap had two publicly stated objectives. One, keep Russian oil flowing despite the sanctions and the embargo being put in place in Europe on imports. And number two, force Putin to have to sell those barrels at a lower price than he would have gotten otherwise, so to hurt his revenue. Until recently, the price of oil, including Russia's oil export, Urals, the main export grade, was soft. It fell, right? It fell from December of last year until the summer to levels well below the price cap. So Washington, Brussels, other authorities thought, leave well enough alone. The price is lower. The discount that Russia was forced to pay went wider, and so that was seen as successful. So I think the G7 authorities thought, look, this is working. Russia's oil is still flowing. Global oil prices are down. Domestic product prices are down. And Russia's getting a lower price per barrel than it would have otherwise. So leave well enough alone. I think that was the thinking.
Even though the West restricted the purchase of Russian oil, it was buying the finished product from countries like India. How do you differentiate between Russian oil and oil from other countries if it is a refined product? It was very difficult to assess. This led to another debate. Is India responsible for not allowing the sanctions to be a success?
Let's just step back and remember that when Russia invaded Ukraine and the IEA and other experts thought as a result we would lose some 3 million barrels a day of Russian exports, oil prices soared. This terrified the Biden administration, G7 leaders. So they put in place a price cap, and the main goal of the price cap was to prevent EU sanctions from driving that Russian oil off the market. As far as I could tell, Washington wanted India, which imported very little Russian oil before the invasion, to start importing a lot of Russian oil, and to do so at a discount, and to benefit economically from it. So from Washington's perspective, India was a very important part of a successful implementation of the price cap. And by success, I mean continue Russian oil exports, because the United States was stopping. More importantly, Europe was going to stop importing. So in order for those Russian barrels to still flow to global markets and keep the global price of crude oil low, and therefore the domestic price of gasoline low, India became a key, let's call it, buyer of that Russian oil. So in my view, India was always seen as a important part of a successful implementation of the price cap.
Clearly, enforcement is an issue. Russia continues to use insurance and tankers from the European companies. So, where lies the fault? How do you deal with it? So the story so far is that there's definitely a cap on Russian oil, but the processed refined product is available in the market. Now, there's no differentiator whether it is a Russian oil or whether it's a oil from any other country. In the given situation, has there been any loophole? I asked McNally, and this is what he said.
Again, the main goal was to ensure the flow of Russian crude oil, but also that means the supply of refined products. And here again, as you mentioned, India's role is seen as important, very important to the successful implementation of this, right? Not only was India expected to and has become the biggest buyer of Russian crude oil, but as you mentioned, India is a large exporter of refined products. And if you look at the data now and you look at where inventories are, especially of heating oil and distillate fuel, also called gas oil, in the United States, in Asia, in Europe, it's low. And this is going into winter when use of oil peaks and it's not gasoline, it's heating oil and diesel. Diesel being very important for the economy in India, the United States, and everywhere. So India's role as not only a crude oil importer and a customer of Russia, but an exporter, even if it's probably Russian crude oil. So in that way, it's working. We just have to be honest about the hard truth. In terms of guaranteeing Russian oil would flow and that its refined products from India would continue to flow, and China for that matter does the same thing, imports Russian crude, exports distillate like in gasoline like India. There it has succeeded.
We clearly see that consumer has become the king. Countries like India, who are import dependent for crude oil, are now working and planning out their own dynamics. So, does this mean that there is a shift in the geopolitical situation? Is the consumer a king? This is what McNally had to say.
So in a way, India is playing an integral support, really, in the stability we've seen since the summer, after things sort of settled down, after the oil market sort of exploded on the first days and weeks of the invasion. So yes, India is playing, a very important role in stabilizing the global oil market, I would say.
Clearly, the whole dynamic has brought India into a focus. Consumers like India are playing a very important role. Now, it is up to India to see how it will leverage its position in the changing global dynamic.